Welcome to the Catastrophic Comeback Podcast with American injury lawyer Clark Speaks, helping you find hope, purpose, and joy after a catastrophic injury.
So when you say practice gratitude and think and look for opportunities to be grateful, what it makes me think of is, I'm a Tony Robbins guy. I don't know. Yeah. I participate in some of Tony Robbins stuff, life coaching and intentionality and all this kind of stuff. And one of the things he says is, all right, so look around the room and find everything that you can find that's brown. Right, and then you look around and you see, okay, well, there's a bureau over there, and there's a couple of lamps, and the wood trim, and then this table right here has a brown base. That chair has a brown base, and then it goes, okay, well, now tell me everything you see that's red. And the idea is, well, I can't think of anything that's red. I can only think of things, but now if you the idea is you will find what you're looking for.
Yes.
And one of the things that I have noticed in talking to people through this series of this podcast is when I talk to Parker Bird, when I talk to Colin McLaren, when I talk to some of these other guys who have just these phenomenal stories where they have been through tragedy, they have been through some really difficult situations, and their plans are different now than they were then.
Yes.
But they have come through with flying colors, and now they live these lives of impact, rich, full, happy, productive lives where they have, it's almost like it didn't slow them down a bit, and they, and you got to look at those guys and admire them for because we're all going to face adversity in different times. Everybody faces adversity. It's just a question of what you do about it and how you overcome it, and their positivity and their optimism and their faith. Mm-hmm. Has really helped them through these things and to turn, these lemons into lemonade So what is your perspective on all that?
Parker really struck me. His story, you were telling me a little bit about that last night, of course, and he, I'm sure that he went through a period where he grieved. Anytime there's a loss, it causes grief, and you need to just get on through that grief. And I would say that the quicker you can get through the grief, which is inevitable, then you can start resetting yourself and saying, okay, this is a loss, that's gone. Now, Parker, he's the one who lost a leg, am I right? So he lost that leg. It's never coming back. But he thought, okay, I've lost this leg, but I've still got the other one, and I've still got two arms, and I've still got my mind. So where do I go from here? What's the next step? And of course, I believe you said he's the one who now is the first and only amputee that's ever played D1 baseball.
That's my understanding.
That's a remarkable story. So that means that when he reset himself, he accepted the loss, but he also realized, okay, I've lost some things, but I didn't lose everything. And so perspective is just such an important part of that. And he's just one. In fact, I would say he's a man of faith.
Sure, definitely. If you listen to the full thing, he talks about that a lot.
Yeah. And Tony Robbins, I'm not nearly as familiar with him, but the little bits that I have seen of him, he's a man who is filled with faith. And he's learned how to exercise that faith in his life in some remarkable ways, and it teaches others to do.
One of the things that struck me too, because I've talked to several people who've been through either over the years I've talked to people who've dealt with paralysis and loss of limb and loss of a loved one and all these kinds of permanent and terrible tragedies. The process seems to be acceptance and frustration and grief and why, and for some period of time.
Right.
And it's not always the same for everybody. And then at some point there becomes another stage where people will go, will sort of accept what's going on, and then they'll sort of start going through these other steps. And a lot of times what they've always described is it's not necessarily linear, especially people who've lost children. Out of order deaths is the way that CJ and Greg Mawson describe it. They had a child that was 20 years old that they lost in a tragic accident. They were some of the first people on the podcast. And they described it, that you might go from here to here to here to here, and then you might go back to here,
Right.
and then something will trigger you back to the very beginning, and it'll be just fresh and raw like it ever was. But eventually you get to, and they all seem to think that in the final stages of this recovery process, that's probably a lifetime ongoing, is turning your attention to try to helping other people through this same thing, and then the idea of helping somebody else through a tragedy can be uplifting and something that really has an enormous impact for you personally. That may not be why you set out to do it in the first place. You just want to help other people and all that, but it really seems to provide a lot of therapeutic and cathartic benefit to the person who's doing the help, and even though they've previously been through that tragedy themselves.
If you can find some meaning in the grief you're experiencing, it can be life-changing for you. There's no question about that. And you mentioned, too, that you go through the stages of grief, but then you might have to go repeat them sometimes. And I found that with Randy, even though it's 55 years ago, it was a terrible grief at the time. There have been times, I know the first maybe 20, 30 years after that, I would sometimes have dreams about him. And he was the age that he would have been had he not died in those dreams. And sometimes I would think about that and I'd miss him again and think about it. And so you accept the fact that grief never maybe completely goes away, but you can still find meaning from it. And to be honest with you, I think the fact that he was such a good person, and since I was his friend and he was my friend, I have felt a responsibility to live my life in a way that he would be proud of me. And that gives me some meaning and some direction. So,
yeah, no, I can see what you're saying. When we look at those tragedies, and we recognize, okay, well, there's some things are just bad, you know, and there's no getting around the fact that they're bad. But we do talk about good things that can result.
Yes.
For example, how it could have a positive impact on you and your life, and then you might have a positive impact on, other people by starting churches and doing all those things. You mentioned yesterday, you said that some of the people that have been through these types of things have a tendency to say, why me? Why does God picking on me? You know, why does? Can you talk about that and what your experiences have been in that situation?
I don't know that I have real helpful answers to that, and I don't know. I'm not convinced that when somebody's asking that question that it's my responsibility to come up with an answer. I'm not even convinced that they expect an answer like that. When you're in chaos like that, when you're trying to find an answer that just doesn't seem to be there, I think maybe what you're really needing is just somebody to share that pain with. And so probably the main thing I try to do in the situations that I have been in, like I say, I'm not really one to counsel as much as just say, man, I feel your pain with you. Or just to say, well, I understand your confusion because I've experienced that same confusion. And so I think really just to make that contact, that relationship is maybe what people are looking for rather than an answer.
Sure, yeah.
Just somebody just to share the pain with them.
I think that makes sense. We talk about you see people talking about how you can help somebody through this situation. Like it's always tough. Like I've got a good friend of mine from college who's lost a child recently to leukemia.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you're like me. When you hear that a kid's has leukemia, and the parents, and you're following this journey of recovery, you think it's going to end well.
Yeah.
That's the way it ends in your mind. You're
Right.
like, okay, they found it, they've got it, they've got treatment, they've got good medical providers, and in your mind, you're like, this is going to go great, and everything's going to be, and then it didn't. The child was doing better, and then the child died, and then it's like I see my friend struggling with this thing, and I'm like, I don't know. I want to reach out and say, hey, but I don't want to go cheer up, or it'll be okay, or some kind of hollow, nonsensical gesture that's not effective. But I also don't want to ignore them,
Right.
So how do you counsel people that are in those, or how do you just be there and listen, I guess?
Yeah, the word that comes to my mind, Jesus said, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep.
That's
and I
perfect.
really think a lot of times when somebody's going through that, they're just looking for somebody to weep with them.
I get it. I
Yeah.
mean, that's what I would be doing.
Yeah.
God forbid if something like that happened to me. Yeah.
So just the human touch, that's I think that's what, a lot of times I think when people are asking for advice, they're just looking for human touch, somebody to grieve with them. And, that's why we have funerals, is so we can grieve together. It certainly doesn't change the fact that they're passed, but it does help to grieve with one another.
Well, thank you for being here. I appreciate it, and I think what you said is going to be helpful to a lot of people.
I hope so.
Thank you.
I
Dana.
hope so. I appreciate the opportunity, Clark.
Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.